Hi, so I'm joined today, I'm very grateful and privileged in the context to be joined by Valerii Pekar, who's coming in from Ukraine and has, I believe, something very important to share with us about the context, the broader cultural, ideological, historical context of what's currently unfolding in Ukraine. So I'm going to allow Valerii to introduce himself, tell us about his background, and then also let him go into that version of what's going on, and then we'll have a few questions. So Valerii, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you just give me a sense of where you are geographically and how things are, first of all, and then maybe a bit more about your background before we get into the details of what you want to share?
Hi, everybody. My name is Valerii Pekar. Pekar is in Ukrainian what baker is in English. So I am baker in English sense. So this is so ancient word that is practically the same in Ukrainian and English. I am a serial entrepreneur and a professor at some Ukrainian business schools, author of 4 books, and also I was involved into many reforms in Ukraine during the last 8 years. Being a member of National Reform Council and advisor to ministers of economics and so on. Today, I am not far from Kyiv, in countryside area. In my house, I think I'm in a safe place. The most close battlefield is just 5 kilometers from here, but it's not permanent. It's just from time to time there are missile strikes, and so what I would like. So what is being held in Ukraine today? Today is March 4th, and the war in Ukraine practically is transiting now from first phase of the war to the second one. First step of the war was the initial plan of Putin. It was what German people know this word blitzkrieg. It was a very fast maneuver war when he tried to catch by mobile forces all major Ukrainian cities and declare his own puppet government and then celebrate his victory, which was impossible because of massive and heroic opposition resistance, not only of Ukrainian army, but also by the whole Ukrainian society. So the whole Ukrainian society is totally mobilized now to defend the country, its independence. And it is how to understand what does it mean to total mobilization of people. It is something like in United Kingdom during Second World War, when practically every person, man or woman, was involved into certain kind of either armed defense or helping to the army or helping to the people who need it, or preparing or maintaining infrastructure, something like that. So it's a total war. It's the first total war in Europe after Second World War, and we in Ukraine are afraid since today Russian forces catch the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. They will try to take the whole Europe as hostages, either because this is the very great threat for the whole Europe if there will be nuclear, how to say, manipulations with the threat of nuclear attack. But what the second phase of the war, which is has been started in this recently, is the scorched earth tactics, which Russian forces already tested in Chechnya and Syria, which means maximum damage to civil population and to civil infrastructure, to create a wave of panic and to let the government capitulate. Anyway, our cities are under attack now, and but I think that we never should give up. And here, by the way, I would like to thank to British nation not only for military and financial assistance now, but for example of resilience and resistance of Second World War. Because here now we repeat every day some phrases of British leaders of that time. So what I would like to share, the general model of what where Ukraine and Russia are today, just for our for the audience to understand why Russia invaded Ukraine, for what reason it was. Not just for a crazy dictator which one day waked up and decided that it is necessary to invade Ukraine. And second, I have several interesting observations which I would like to feed brains of the community and ask to think about that, and maybe there will be some interesting contributions of different researchers and philosophers, which will show us something new. Because today, definitely, Ukraine is a turning is a turning place, as a critical place for the whole, at least the whole Europe. I think not only from the point of view of nuclear threat, but also from the point of view to the major issue: what would be the new international order after that. So let me please start with something like that. I would like to use the lexicon terms of so-called spiral dynamics, understanding that this is not a brilliant model, that it is criticized widely. But I need some words to explain what is being held. So I am very skeptical towards spiral dynamics, as well as most of you are, or at least many of you are. But I need some words to explain, and please forgive me that I should use this model. So let me just share my screen. And sorry. So if we should remind the metaphor of the great river offered by Ken Wilber, that imagine Ken Wilber said a great river and millions men and women are going through this river from the beginning to the ocean. And I don't want to look like a Marxist indeed, but we definitely see certain stages of social, psychological, technological, economic, and political development, as well as cultural, religious development, and identity development. And the great vector, the grand histoire, the great history of that is more freedom, less fear, and higher degree of structures, and higher energy potential, and indeed less violence and more happiness. So the human history could be explained as by the wave models. So waves are coming after every, so let's say, phase transition. But all previous waves are in depth. So not every wave doesn't cover the whole planet. And today on our planet Earth, we can see different stages of societal development at the same time, from, let's say, Swedish society to Amazonian society somewhere in jungles. So diversity increased every time, and now we have different epochs, different levels which are manifested at the same time on our planet. So, and this picture we should see at every quadrant of integral model. So imagine that all those things, technology, economics, politics, religion, culture, language, management, thinking, what else? They are not, they develop not simultaneously, so they are not synchronized. They are look like alpinists, alpine explorers. They are connected. Everything is connected to everything, and those waves we can see in every sphere of human development. Not independently, they are mutually connected, but they are not synchronized. So where Ukraine is on that? This is the transition. This is the transition which Western Europe made in 200 years ago, and we are just here. So this is the wave of freedom which started with Netherlands, England, and France, and America, and then Central Eastern Europe, where I'm living now, because Ukraine is definitely a part of Central Eastern Europe, was swept by Spring of Nations of 1848, then fall of empires, and so on. And we in Ukraine, simply are on the same level as other Central Eastern European countries were in the beginning of 20th century. So we have retarded development. Ukraine has retarded development 100 years, because we are now absolutely at the same place where Central Eastern European nations and countries were 100 years ago. Why? Because of colonial policy of Russian or Soviet Russian regime, because of a lot of traumas of 20th century, famine named Holodomor, which took millions of Ukrainian lives. Second World War, where Ukraine was the major battlefield. A lot of Russification, Stalin terror, and so on and so on. Finally, Chernobyl, disappearing of Soviet Union, and now the war. So we have permanent social traumas in 20th century, and this is the main cause of our retarded development. But our development was not, since in integral model, different fields of human being are not synchronized. We, Ukraine, were modern already in terms of technological and conscience development. So 2 quadrants of Aqual models, upper left and upper right, were already modern. It was where modernity was, because Ukraine became an urban country with heavy industry, and heavy industry needs engineers, architects, scientists, and so on and so on. So we have, as individuals in technological development, in personal development, we had already a critical mass of modern society. In lower left and lower right quadrants, we were not. So that means in social, cultural, and political development, we still came into the beginning of 21st century as a medieval society, as a society pre-modern, where economics is based on the rent of privileges, like feudal society, when politics is based on clans, when values are paternalistic of the major part of the society, identity is narrow ethnic, people are subjects, social elevators are closed, and so on. And maybe you heard a lot about oligarchs in Ukraine and Russia. What are those oligarchs? Oligarchs are simply feudals of our time, people which are not capitalists, people which are not, which don't make their money from money and talent and management and so. They do their money on privileges. Privileges when power makes fortunes, and this is a multi-level pyramid, very, very stable. Relations are bilateral. Maybe you see here something like a patron-client system, which could be observed in many countries. But here, this is purely feudal pyramid of feudal lords, which simply we call now not dukes and barons, but we call them oligarchs. So from that pre-modern society, we are going to a modern society, having already a critical mass of people with modern thinking, critical thinking, rational thinking, and higher education, and having a good technological level. I will remind you that Ukraine is a nuclear country, is a space country, is an airplane country, and is information technology country, and so on. So we have huge power in the sphere of talents and science and technology, but we have lower left and lower right quadrants are still pre-modern. That means that we have medieval economics with the feudal pyramid. Indeed, this is a major part of economic because there are indeed a very modern part of that, like information technology sector, banking sector, and so on. But the essential part of Ukrainian economy is still there. And also social systems, political systems, and so on. So what we are going to a modernity with the liberal market, accountable government, national state, modern values, political nation, and so on and so on. This is exactly what famous researcher, Nobel Prize winner Douglas North described as open access versus limited access of pre-modern time. This is exactly what Darona Dzemoglu said is inclusive economic and political institutions versus extractive institutions. And indeed, this is connected with independence war. Let me explain. So in 1991, Ukraine and Russia were practically on the same place on the map of human development. So starting their way to build lower left and lower right quadrants to make transition from pre-modern to modernity, having already upper right and upper left modern level of development. So 30 years ago, Ukraine and Russia started from the same point. Ukraine was not less economically developed than Russia, and Ukraine was not less technologically developed than Russia. We were at the same place. But then we shall see some difference. We saw that we are going different directions, at least from the beginning of 21st century. Why? So let me show you again the very, very wrong but very useful picture of human development map. So then after disappearing of Soviet Union, there were a certain crisis, and after crisis, Ukraine started its big leap to modernity, which is orange on my map, and Russia starting to go back to more archaic model. That means that within some 10-15 years, the difference between two countries was already very great. So Ukraine were installing more and more modern social, political, and economic systems and cultural, and at the same time, Russia was installing the more and more archaic social, political, economic, religious, and cultural models. And here I use spiral dynamics because the one word pre-modern is not enough for me. One word pre-modern doesn't make difference between pre-modern level of which is spiral dynamic is blue, the level of truth and rules and hierarchy, and what is red, which is the very centralized and very society based on violence. So imagine that we were at the same point, blue point, 30 years ago. So Ukraine is going to orange, Russia is going to red, not from the beginning of 1990s, but let's say from the beginning of 21st century when Putin came into power in Russia. Why there are so different ways of development? Because of different political culture. Indeed, Russia and Ukraine are different cultures and different languages and different stories and different identities, but what makes the difference? Not the language, indeed. Language is important, culture is important, but to speak frankly, there are so many people in Ukraine which have Russian and their native language or are bilingual. What makes the difference? The political culture. Take a look on the political culture of Russia for centuries and political culture of Ukraine for centuries. Russia was also a very hierarchical, centralized, despotic state, and Ukraine was never like that. Ukraine was always a very horizontal network system, even before modernity. So Ukraine started its life 1,000 years ago. Let's say Kyiv, the city where I'm living, is 15th century old. So 15th century old, that's okay. That's one. And in 10th, 11th centuries, Kyiv was one of the major European cities and one of the major European centers of culture and education. But it lasts just for a few centuries. After that, indeed, it declined. The Ukrainian state started as a very multi-level feudal state 1,000 years ago without centralized power. And then next stage of our development was in early modernity of Europe, like a Cossack state. Cossack was an absolutely horizontal military aristocratic republic, let's say. Ukrainian cities had Magdeburg law, Russian never. And Ukrainian identity is a national identity like European nations. Russian identity is imperial modern identity. So this great difference in political culture is caused by the, let's say, anchors. Ukraine from its very beginning was a part of Europe. Russian Empire in any forms, Russian Tsarist form, Soviet form, it was still the same empire, was the daughter of Asian political culture. So Asian political culture and European political culture clashed, but not geographically, but chronologically. So we are going to modernity. We are trying to leave pre-modern time for modernity, and they are going back to archaic, back to red. And indeed, if someone is going right and someone is going left, that the difference increased and increased and increased, and there would be a lot of blood on the edge, which we can see here. So I can say that the war today in Ukraine is the war between the society which tries to go from pre-modern time as far as possible to modernity, and another society is trying to go back to archaic form, to the form of a very centralized dictatorship. So that's the model. That's the model. So then, and that's a general model. And then I would like to highlight some interesting points. Maybe Jonathan, maybe some questions on that point. Or
yeah, would you like me to now help you?
It's up to you because you are the host.
well, I mean, I don't want to interrupt you if you feel you're in flow and you have other things to say, but I have many things I could ask. So it's up. What works better for you?
Uh, I can continue and then we can discuss.
Sure, sure.
So I would like just to share with with our audience some thoughts which I found interesting. So I'm not a military expert, and what I can see observing the today's everyday life in Ukraine during last 8 days, which are frankly speaking like 8 years, because time is very, very condensed in Ukraine now. So every minute we have something new, and this is a very fast war. I could observe some interesting points. First, why Russian fast war, Russian blitzkrieg? Why I use the German word? Just because there are so many parallels between Putin and Hitler. So imagine Hitler started the war in 1941 by bombing Kyiv in early morning. Putin started on February 24th by bombing Kyiv in early morning. Then take the city. So Hitler killed Jews in so-called Babi Yar, which I'm sure every person in Europe knows. So, and Putin again bombed and made air missile strike on Babi Yar. Let's say killing those Jews for the second time, now symbolically. Hitler shelled the nice city of Odessa, the pearl on Black Sea, from battleships, and Putin is now shelling Odessa from battleships. Hitler arranged a siege, a blockade of the city of Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, and absolutely the same blockade is now around Mariupol, the seaport the major seaport for Ukrainian export, which, by the way, creates a threat not only to Ukraine because of threat of economic collapse if export will be blockaded, but to Putin would like to create a threat to food security of Middle East. That's very important because creating a food shortage in Middle East will again generate a huge amount of refugees coming to Europe, because Ukraine is the major producer of food for that. So anyway, this fast war failed. So Blitzkrieg now turned into Blitzfail. And why? There is a fundamental reason why the huge army prepared by Putin failed with the fast war to catch Ukrainian cities. Because the fundamental reason for that failure is a fundamental difference between two societies. So two societies clashed. One is a very hierarchical and centralized archaic society of Soviet type, based on fear, on humility, where the value of a human being is zero. And on the other side, there is a modern network society of free people, which are accustomed with the freedom, self-sufficient, interaction, volunteering, and indeed certain kind of superiority over the state. So where individual is more valued than the state. And so Putin thought that a huge Russian army will strike to much smaller and let's say not weaker, but let's say poorer, not so rich, not so well equipped Ukrainian army. But it is not Russian army which strikes the Ukrainian army. It is Russian army striking now Ukrainian society, which is absolutely different story. And so that means that if you shall see what people are defending now, the city with the guns from Russian invaders, you will meet the software developers and designers, MBA people who are MBA graduates and their professors. So men and women, so very different people of modern society who simply who have no military uniform. They simply take guns and go to defend their homes, their families, and their children. This is not the same that an army meets an army. This is a very interesting thing which I would like to share. Another one which I would like to share is that indeed the whole nation of Ukraine rallied around the key values of Ukrainians, like freedom, self-sufficiency, social cohesion, mutual support and assistance, and self-organization, volunteering, and a sense of humor. Humor is another point which Jonathan knows I would like to share because it could be interesting to the audience. So that's all usual Ukrainian values, but for the first time we see some things which never appeared before. First is a political unity and absence of strife among politicians and among citizens. The Ukrainian proverb says that where there are two Ukrainians, there are three different points of views. Another Ukrainian proverb says that I will use Ukrainian word hetman. Hetman is a military elected, democratically elected leader of early modern time of Cossack Republic. Another proverb, Ukrainian proverb says when there are two Ukrainians, so then there are three different hetmans, so three different democratically elected leaders. So traditionally we all are in permanent political strife about every single issue of Ukrainian life, which is pretty normal for European country. I remember a meeting of Western diplomats, and one of diplomats from Western Europe, from a country which before that, which that time was not so friendly to Ukraine, says it is really hard to help Ukraine because Ukrainians have no common vision of any single issue. And it was a brilliant answer by Lithuanian ambassador. She said, yes, because this is we call this democracy. But now we have absolute unity of the people, and it is sociological polls say that 98% of population, of adult population, support the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian army. I hardly remember something where more than 60% of Ukrainians agree. Even about sun is going up is in the east and down to in the west. So, and second, which is very important for me personally, is that for the first time we see public support of state institutions and trust in them. Usually in Ukraine, state is something not very valuable. Why? Because in Ukraine, Ukraine never had its own state during the last 300 years. When Ukrainian state 300 years ago, Ukrainian state signed an agreement, a union with Russia, with Moscow state. At that time it was not Russia, it was Moscow. And during next 70 years, Ukraine simply disappeared inside Moscow. After that, Moscow state took the name of ancient name of Ukrainian state, which now we pronounce in English Russia. This was a name of ancient Ukrainian state, which now
Rus, you mean?
Yeah, Rus is the same. But Rus and is an old word, and Russia is just a derived word. So If you will take a look to the old maps, you will see that before that it was Moscow Kingdom. So, by the way, we had no own state for centuries, and we didn't trust in state. We didn't believe in state. We didn't value the state. And even last years, state institutions enjoy very low trust and very low engagement of people. And today, it's totally different. And this marks a very important transition of Ukrainian society to a new, more mature level. And the very significant indicator here, in my humble opinion, is honoring each hero and mourning for each victim, which Ukraine now demonstrates, is in contrast to Russia's concealment of truth about losses. In Russia, there are absolutely no word about losses. Just one personal name was announced. And so for today, already some 9,000 Russian soldiers are killed in action. It's a huge number, because imagine that Soviet Union during 10 years of Afghan war in Afghanistan, before disappearing of Soviet Union, lost in action 15,000 people. Now, just during 1 week and a little bit more than 1 week, they lost 9,000 people. And they say no word about that. They never, they say no word about that. And even they introduced recently a criminal responsibility for publicly speaking about losses of Russian army. Absolutely different, opposite situation in Ukraine, where we know names of our heroes, we know names of our victims, and we cry for every death. What is my point number 3? My point number 3 is the very controversial point about national identity. If you should recall into memory the recent works on world philosophers and researchers about identity, you will see that there are 2 different models of identity. One is obvious, this is national identity. For instance, every people in Poland are Poles, every people in French are Frenchmen, and every people in Italy are Italians. It's clear. And an absolutely different model is in America, where people are keep their ethnic origin. So they have origin that they can be Italians or Jews or Indians or Chinese or Greeks or something like that. But all of them are Americans, and they are proud to be Americans because this is a civic nation. What is in Ukraine? And then Europe had a problem with that, because a lot of people who are not Italians and Poles and Finns and so on, and Germans, they come to Europe, and who they are? They don't feel themselves Europeans. They don't feel themselves Germans and Italians. And then the idea of multiculturalism was introduced. So they can indeed, this is in my mind is something similar to keep the idea of American identity. So the soil and blood identity is not real in Europe today. So that means that Turks in Germany, or let's say Kurds in Portugal and so on, they should enjoy their own national cultures, languages, and identities, and they should feel themselves at the same time Europeans, which simply failed. And this is not my statement. This is a statement of many European researchers. And now we all in Europe are in the search of new model of identity, which could help us in our postmodern world, where we every individual, every person has his or her own right to form his or her personal identity, and but at the same time we should maintain social cohesion and common action and readiness to common action. So Ukraine now offers something absolutely new. We have now something special. We have absolutely multi-ethnic society here, where many people are Ukrainians, many people are Russians, many people are Russian-speaking Ukrainians, which is a legacy of Soviet time, of so-called Russification process. Also, we have the small but very resilient nation of Crimean Tatars. I'm sure that everybody in Europe knows that this small European nation, again for the second time in European history, lost their motherland, because they have no other motherland except of Crimea. This is the indigenous nation of Crimea, formed 1,000 years ago, and they all were deported by Stalin in 1944. 80% of population died, but then, after Ukraine declared its independence, Ukraine welcomed all Crimean Tatars. Please don't think that the word Tatar means something like it is similar to those Tatar which are on Volga around Kazan city. There are two different nations. Indeed, both of them have certain legacy of huge empire of Turks, but of Genghis Khan, let's say, more than 700 years ago. But their ways 700 years ago, their ways were already different. Mm-hmm. So that is why we in Ukraine prefer to use their own indigenous name. They call themselves Kirimli, which means the nation of Crimea.
Okay.
So this small nation of Crimea was deported, then is now back to Ukraine, to independent Ukraine, and now again they are under pressure because they don't want to live in Russia. Indeed, they were against Russian annexation, and they are under tortures. They are arrested and pressed, and so on. Also, we have in Ukraine Armenians, Azeri, Jews, Greeks. Not Greeks from Greece, but the ancient Greeks, which built their colonies around Black Sea, much more than 1,000 years ago, and so on and so on and so on. Well, and at the same time, they all feel themselves Ukrainians, which is something like American, but the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian identity dominates, like in Europe. So this is a mixed, something like a mixed model, which isn't clear for us for the moment, but which solves the major problem of failure of multiculturalism, in my humble opinion, because I used to speak to all those people from all those different ethnic groups, and on the one side, we now are living in national state like European states. On the other side, we let all minorities to live their own life and to keep their own identities. And at the same time, we remove controversy between first and second,
okay,
which multiculturalism could not do. And the last point is the humor. That's an interesting point, which I would like to share. Sorry, I feel that my English isn't so good, but indeed, I beg my pardon to everybody. But I think that people catch the major messages of my speech. It seems that no war in the history of mankind has generated such a huge amount of humor from the very first day of the war. On the part of the defending party, because usually the victim of aggression feels pain, anger, hatred, fear, and so on. And our case is the same indeed, but there is something else. We have a huge, absolutely enormous wave of humor rose in the first day, even in the first day when nothing was clear for the moment. And even now, today, when bad news came more than good news, we have a lot of humor. It's never happened before. Some people in Ukraine believe that humor is something that is a special characteristic of European people, which is not so indeed. Those people who know other cultures know that there are so many different nations with a huge sense of humor in Europe. Maybe psychologists will say that this is a kind of something like a displacement effect and so on, but I see something different here. What I see here, this war is a war of modernity, which is indeed multi-level, military, diplomatic, informational, and so on and so on. And also the so-called semantic war or conceptual war, which Russian strategists say this is a war of semantics, this is a war of notions, this is a war who will win the right to name events and to name phenomena. And Russian strategists stated that this is the highest level of war. That is why Russian invasion is not only military, but on the level of senses, narratives, and so on and so on. This is new. This is not new for the world, because even let's say 2005, Sun Tzu described this in his strategy book in ancient China and so on. But what is the difference? We are living now in a postmodern time. Even though we are waging the war for modernism with the Archaic Empire. By the way, this three-wave overlay is something completely unique in the history of wars, I see. When we have three waves, pre-modern Archaic Empire, modernism of Ukraine, and postmodern cultural codes, which embrace all of us. And postmodernism puts into our hands a very powerful tool of defense in the semantic war, which is deconstruction. They offer us their own narratives, their own senses, their own stories, and their own frame of reality. And we have in Ukraine a postmodernic weapon, which is deconstruction, which is no worse than sometimes that anti-tank missile. So they come with tanks, and we have anti-tank missile, and they come with their narratives, and we have anti-narrative missile, which is humor. They offer their meanings, their narratives, and we simply burn all of them by humor, by laughing. This is the best deconstructor, one that burns. And that is why I saw so enormous amount of humor. So when I ask people on my Facebook to write down in comments new jokes which appeared a few days ago, I collected more than 1,700 different jokes. I don't know what to do with that. So my life is not enough to process all of that. So that is a very and I would like to ask the audience to think what it could mean. Am I right? And what is being held in this field? So that was five different notes which I would like to share about fundamental difference between societies and about I forgot one which is very interesting, but more, let's say, geopolitical. I could say that Ukrainian resistance significantly changes the world balance of power, which is just to show that Russia is not the huge mythical giant which threat the whole world, but also the world order, because the current world order is decades-old system of international security, now broken by different authoritarian regimes and use of force. And Ukraine is now reviving faith in the sovereignty, faith into world order, faith that zones of influence are impossible in the era of sovereign states. And Ukraine is putting back the agenda of choosing between values and interests, which is different for some politicians in the world today, but we see that they make right choice. So eternal values or the temporary interests. For years and years, interests prevailed, and now values in Europe prevail. So Europe is back for values, and we see very interesting statements now. And just to finish, indeed, this is again about the power of democracy against dictatorship, a power of civil society against authoritarian state, a power of horizontal network system against hierarchical centralized system, which I already mentioned. And these resonate with a lot of people around the world, which is interesting. Mm-hmm. So sorry for my poor English, but I think that you got the point.
No, I did. Thank you so much. So we've there's a lot to take in there, and it's really commendable to cover such terrain and such a rich picture of both of Ukraine and its relationship with Russia and the current conflict. I suppose there's a few things I want to query to get a better understanding of them. Some are just very basic factual ones, like that speak to the current debates that are raging on our radios and our TVs, and then the deeper ones about the thesis that you developed. Just on two small points, first of all, I noted that this is more in the kind of mainstream geopolitical conversation, but you mentioned 9,000 Russian casualties. Now, I have no reason to doubt that figure, but at the same time, you say it confidently, like you're sure of it. Is it just known? I mean, obviously we know we can't trust the Russian version of events, but equally, what makes you confident you can trust your version of events?
Simply friends of mine which are on the front line, they do a lot of photos and videos.
Right.
And we have a group of civil activists, a huge group of civil activists I'm involved also, which collect everything and check facts.
Right.
So we have a big database of already checked facts with videos and photos of people killed in action. And indeed, we have already a lot of killed people which are now in our on our territory, and we are now asking the Red Cross to take them to their families,
right?
To take back to Russia. And indeed, when the battle is still held, it is not possible to count exact number of that.
Oh, sure.
Exact number of losses. So this is a kind of very approximated estimation based on the number of people who were killed and now are prepared for Red Cross to take them back to their families.
Okay. And it's interesting, vis-a-vis what you said about Ukrainian culture valuing the specificity of individuals, that it's important to you to return the bodies and not just bury them, or something else. If that makes sense.
That's right.
And so that was, so then the second thing was, in passing, you said the idea of spheres of influence is no longer valid somehow, or insofar as it is, it's only for sovereign states. Tell me a little more what you meant by that.
You know that after Second World War, there was a so-called Yalta Conference, where practically was agreed between the West and the Soviet Union, then there will be certain zones of influence. Let's say the West will take control over some countries, and the East will take control about some, the Soviet Union, not the East. Soviet Union will take control over Eastern Europe, and countries like Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary and so on will be the zone of influence of Soviet Union. And there will be some neutral countries like Austria, and there will be countries like Finland, which in cultural and spiritual and political sense belong to the West, but could not be a part of the West totally, because this is a Russian zone of influence. And then after Soviet Union disappeared, during the first years after disappearing, there was a policy of new independent states.
Okay.
That means that every state should select each way by itself. Like Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, now they are members of both European Union and NATO and so on.
Right.
And then, since the beginning of 21st century, when Putin came into power, he declared that the concept of zones of influence is back.
Right.
That means that Ukraine belongs to Russian zones of influence, and that means that nothing in Ukraine could be done without a Russian okay.
So it's quite an important point. So because this is interesting, it's something we don't hear on the radio and so forth. Your contention is that the very idea of spheres of influence, while it might have been valid after the Second World War, and it had some relevance in the Cold War, at the moment
exactly that's a legacy of Cold War,
right? But then at the moment that the Soviet Union broke up into the many independent states, I forget how many, 15 or so.
15, yes.
Yeah. Then that moment was when the very idea of spheres of influence passed away, or should have passed away. But then Putin tried to bring it back, but you're saying without any legitimacy.
Yep.
Right.
And now what Putin now wants from Ukraine and the West? He said, I want Ukraine to be out of any unions, out of any blocks, and demilitarized. So that means the country without international political and diplomatic security, and without its own military security.
Right.
Which simply would be very, very soon a victim, having no army and no powerful allies in the world. It would be just a victim.
Yeah, and it's a kind of
and if you will see a map of Russian invasions, like Transnistria, like Crimea and Eastern Ukraine, like Ossetia, Abkhazia, and Georgia, then also there are, let's say, great influence into conflict between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Karabakh. You will see, and even in the recent events in Kazakhstan, you will see the same idea: to create a small zone of chaos, to manage zones of influence, right, and to project power through the zone of chaos.
Right.
It's absolutely the same, either for Ossetia or for Karabakh or for Crimea or for Transnistria. It's the same story.
Oh, that's fascinating. And I see now when people say Putin's trying to bring back the Cold War, one of the things it means is that he needs that kind of pretext for the very idea of spheres of influence to make sense. Okay, so in terms of the developmental model, I'm wondering, I mean, Russia in some ways looks archaic and you might say red in spiral dynamic terms, but it does have presumably other aspects. What would a part of the Russian intelligentsia say about this? They would say that's not the whole story. There must be countercultural narratives too.
Sure. Remember that we are in integral model still. So that means that in upper left quadrant, we see different people.
Yeah.
We see people
with the audience by upper left.
We see
the psychology.
And it was different psychological level of personal maturity. Indeed, we have middle class in Russia. Indeed, we have let's say intelligent people. There is a specific Russian word for this social group, which is intelligentsia, which means people of let's say white collar workers, and we see a lot of rural people and so on. So very different. But this is the upper left, and let's take the lower right. What is the economic and political model? And we should see that political model is the Genghis Khan Empire,
right?
A very centralized state with zero value of human,
right?
And this is not like a blue state of let's say late medieval time or let's say early modernity in Europe, when there is a rule of law and there are some independent aristocrats and so on and so on.
So just sorry to interrupt, really. Just for the audience's sake, I just want to back up so they can follow this, because those who don't know, I mean, you introduced spiral dynamics already, but a kind of sister conceptual structure to go along with spiral dynamics to some extent, or as part of the same overall model, is something called the Four Quadrant Map. And the Four Quadrant Map is trying to distill all of reality as far as possible into four main forms of phenomena. and in the top left, you have the sort of the axes are the degree to which something is collective, which is on the lower axis, and on the upper quadrants, it's individual. And on the other side, you have the extent to which it's interior, which is the upper side, and on the bottom, it's exterior, which means that the top left is primarily about psychology and the inner life of the individual. And you're saying there that in Russia, that's very mixed and varied and many different forms of things there. But you're saying that in the bottom right, which is where the institutional models are and the systems are, that political culture is basically Genghis Khan on stilts, that it's a hierarchical czarist kind of model. And also the economy, as some have described it, as a kind of anarcho-mafia economy where it's designed based on privilege and so forth. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that said. And then the bottom left, how would you describe the bottom left there, which is the culture of Russia?
Also different because every social group has its own culture. There are some high culture, and there is some popular culture, and the popular culture could be described as something like of blue level. So the very let's say the short word pop culture describes very briefly what does it mean. So different social groups indeed consume different cultural products, but all of them, middle class, rich people, designers and ITs, developers, rural agricultural workers, all of them live in one political system. So the political system is unitive.
Right.
And this political system, so when you are from the upper level of maturity and you live in this political system, your strategy is escape, personal escape. So you create your own bubble with your own friends, which also are modern people with the same values and the same cultural preferences as you. You meet only them. You never turn on your TV set. You never watch TV. You just try to find your information which you need over the internet, on the websites which other people in the country never use. And you live in a bubble. You live, and this kind of escapism is very popular in Russia, as it was very popular in Soviet Union, because in Soviet Union there were a lot of people with modern thinking, and they needed to have some specific bubbles to survive.
Right.
But all this works until the total war, until the state declares martial law. And when the state declares martial law, it is expected that Russia will declare this today, which means mass mobilization. That means that you go out of your bubble with a very modern culture, with freedom of information, with your computer and Java programming or something like that, and you take the gun and go to be killed by Ukrainian soldiers, which indeed is a great challenge for millions in Russia today.
Gosh, I mean, it's such a rich conversation. There's so much more to say. I know you've only got a few more minutes. As far as I understand what you're saying in integral terms, in terms of the sort of thesis you were developing, the variation between Ukraine and Russia may not be it will be different, but it may have overlaps in the bottom left, the top left, and the top right. But the biggest difference is in the bottom right, and it's a very significant difference. And that permeates all of the other spheres as well.
I think that we should classify what I say, what I mean when I say political culture.
Yeah.
Political culture is a way how people understand the state and communicate with state and interfere with state.
Right.
And I think this is lower left.
Okay.
So this is like Robert Keegan says, this is in over our heads.
Yeah.
This is not written in Constitution. Constitution, I lived in Soviet Union. Constitution was fantastic. Nothing was true in this Constitution.
Yeah, sure.
So this is not something written in Constitution. This is something written on your brain.
Yeah, so this is what they call the interior collective. So it's
absolutely
inside you, but it's shared. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. And if our collective imagine it, as Benedict Anderson said, if our collective collective inner says that we are all individuals, the value of people of human being is very high, but we have some values which we should defend and which we should ready to die for, like freedom, like human rights, like the issue of identity, to be to choose the identity by yourself, not by the state. In this case, you see something like Ukrainian society today is.
Right. Wow. So Valerii, what's amazing is that you come across as very buoyant at the moment. Like your morale seems quite high. I mean, I know that your country is being devastated as we speak, but you seem. How would you describe your orientation towards this phase? That you feel that you don't want you don't want them to make you tremor with fear. You seem to want to carry on doing your work. For example, this call. Just talk me through how you're feeling about the situation vis-a-vis your own morale.
It is like something like, you see, nobody in Ukraine would like to live back in Soviet Union. But this wouldn't be, the point is that this wouldn't be a Soviet Union, a very vegetarian Soviet Union of terms of indeed, Europeans and Americans, they don't feel that Soviet Union of a Cold War time was a vegetarian. It was not a vegetarian neither innerly nor out, neither in internal nor international politics. But it is much more vegetarian than Stalin time. So indeed, nobody in Ukraine would like to live in vegetarian Cold War Soviet state, but absolutely no one here would like to live in Stalin state.
Right.
And people really so people will really better die with guns in their hands or without guns in their hands than to be back in Stalin time. That's very clear.
And so that's how. So I mean, by vegetarian here, you mean sort of mild and not dangerous somehow.
Not so cannibalistic.
Right. Okay. Right. Literally, cannibalistic is a good word there. Right. And you're saying that the fear of Putin's Russia overtaking the country is commensurate with the fear of Stalin's purges and terror.
Absolutely. So Putin is something like Stalin and Hitler mixed and
right.
Let's say squeezed.
Wow. Well, listen, I'm so grateful for your time and very privileged, and there may be chances to speak further about these ideas in the future, but in the meantime, of course, I just wish you and family and friends and all of your country well, and that you stay safe and strong and do what you have to do. And in the meantime, I'm just very, very thankful. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, everybody.